Today we're going to look at how scientists go about investigating phenomenon or trying to gather some information. So we're going to look at some steps of what we call the scientific method. Now these steps are more of a process than absolutely set in stone. Different scientists might list them in a slightly different ways, but again it's emphasizing the process of trying to do an investigation scientifically that we want to emphasize in this lesson. So we're going to start off with observations, and observations sometimes are left out when people are talking about this process, but I believe it's very, very important that we include those. What observations do is they raise the curiosity of a scientist or an investigator. People do science all the time, they just don't think about it in that context, so it's not just limited to scientists. But let me start off with a specific example with observations, and we're going to go back several centuries, and we're going to look at the work of a microbiologist whose name was Alexander Fleming. And Alexander Fleming was trying to grow bacteria on a small little dish called a petri dish. And what he was finding was that his petri dishes that he was trying to grow bacteria kept being infected with mold, which was common back in those days. We didn't know a whole lot about good techniques, or certainly not what we know now. And so mold contamination was a fairly common event. Well, what Fleming actually noticed, and this is my point about the observation, is that he noticed that while bacteria was growing all over the dish, it was not growing around the mold. And he was the first one to really observe this or wonder what was going on here. So he made the observation then that bacteria does not seem to be growing around the mold. Well, that led him to the next step as we're listing or going through our scientific method here of the question. And his question then was, well, why isn't bacteria growing around the mold? Well, he came up then with an educated guess, or an educated guess is a hypothesis. Now these two go connected, so a hypothesis is an educated guess which answers the question. It's not just simply a random educated guess. It again all ties in with our observations, questions, hypothesis. But because he made this observation, he asked the question, he came up with a hypothesis that the mold has some sort of factor in it that kills bacteria or prevents bacteria growth. And based on this observation, which other people hadn't made before, this actually led to the discovery of the antibiotic penicillin. So again, observation, very important point. Alexander Fleming's observation has now saved countless lives. Well, once we get our hypothesis or an educated guess, then the scientist or just the individual will do an experiment. And we're going to actually look at the experiment in a little bit later in this particular lesson. And finally, the last step of the scientific method is a conclusion. And the conclusion is just a simple statement. It doesn't have to be complex. And a conclusion summarizes the results of the experiment. We usually just say something like the results of this experiment either support our hypothesis. Sometimes it actually does the opposite. We may say that the results refute the hypothesis, and sometimes the results don't tell us much. It's kind of frustrating when that happens, but sometimes that is what happens. Or we say the results are inconclusive. So our steps of the scientific method: observation, question, hypothesis, experiment, and conclusion. And shortly we'll be going through proper experimental design.
Vizi online texts are a new kind of textbook, built with the help of great subject matter experts. These new learning resources have already helped thousands of students succeed. Our original content uses animations, simulations, video and graphics, self-assessments, exercises, and review materials to engage students in their study. Our approach is proven to improve learning outcomes, and that's why Vizi exists, to transform lives by making education more engaging.